The speedometer needle trembled at 75 as Derek Hastings gripped the steering wheel of the rented Winnebago, his knuckles white against the cracked leather. Interstate 77 stretched endlessly southward through Ohio's dying October landscape, each mile marker a countdown to something he couldn't name but desperately needed. In the passenger seat, Rebecca stared through the windshield with the hollow gaze of someone who had stopped seeing the world 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days ago. The exact moment their 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Tyler had stopped breathing in the twisted wreckage of their Honda Pilot. "Take the next exit," Rebecca said, her voice barely audible over the RV's laboring engine. It was the first thing she'd said in 3 hours. Behind them, Nathan Mitchell cleared his throat and made another attempt at conversation. "Hey, remember when we used to camp at Mohican? The kids would roast marshmallows until they were completely black and Tyler would—" His voice cracked. Sandra, his wife, remained motionless beside him, her eyes closed, lost somewhere between grief and the prescription cocktail that kept her functioning. Derek caught Nathan's eyes in the rearview mirror. They both knew this wasn't about camping or healing or any of the therapeutic bullshit their grief counselors had suggested. This was about the conversation they'd had 3 weeks ago in Derek's garage, surrounded by boxes of children's clothes they couldn't bring themselves to donate. The conversation about Sunday, about the pact they'd made when the pain became too much to carry. "I found the place," Derek had said that night, showing them the campground website on his laptop. Hocking Hills State Forest, remote, isolated. Cleanup would be minimal. They'd all nodded. Sandra had actually smiled for the first time since the accident. The RV shuddered as Derek took exit 56, following signs toward Hocking Hills State Park. The sun hung low and orange through the bare trees, casting everything in the amber light of endings. They drove deeper into the forest on increasingly narrow roads until civilization disappeared entirely behind walls of sandstone cliffs and skeletal branches. The ranger station appeared suddenly around a bend, a small log building that looked like it had been there since the 1940s. Derek parked and went inside while the others waited in silence. The elderly ranger behind the counter had the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades watching people disappear into these woods. "Jim Kellison," the man said, extending a gnarled hand. His eyes were pale blue and unsettling. "You folks here for camping?" "Site 13, Derek said. "Reserved under Hastings." Kellison's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Site 13. That's a ways back. Isolated. Most folks prefer the main campground." He studied Derek's face. "You've lost something important, haven't you?" Derek felt his breath catch. "I'm sorry?" "This place—" Kellison handed him a map and a set of keys. "It calls to people like you, people carrying weight, but I've learned over the years that not everything that's lost should be found." His fingers lingered on Derek's hand for a moment too long. Some burdens aren't meant to be set down. They become part of who you are. Derek wanted to ask what he meant, but Kellison had already turned away, busying himself with paperwork that didn't seem to exist. Site 13 sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by towering sandstone cliffs that blocked out most of the remaining daylight. Ancient caves yawned black in the rock faces, and Derek could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness. The site itself was just a concrete pad with electrical hookups, a picnic table, and a fire ring. Beyond that, nothing but forest stretching into shadow. They set up camp in mechanical silence. Derek connected the electrical and water lines while Nathan arranged chairs around the fire pit. Rebecca and Sandra remained in the RV, moving like sleepwalkers through the motions of making dinner nobody would eat. As full darkness fell, the forest came alive with sounds. Not the familiar chirping of crickets or hooting of owls, but something else. Rustling in the underbrush, branches snapping without wind, and underneath it all a sound so faint Derek thought he might be imagining it. Children whispering. They went to bed early. Derek lay on the narrow RV mattress beside Rebecca, listening to her breathe and wondering if she was really asleep or just pretending. Through the thin walls, he could hear Nathan tossing restlessly on the convertible dinette bed. Sandra hadn't made a sound since they'd arrived. At 3:33 a.m., Rebecca sat bolt upright. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Derek had been dreaming of the accident. The dream that came every night, where he could somehow reach through time and grab the steering wheel a second sooner, brake a second earlier, save his children from his own moment of inattention. But Rebecca's voice pulled him back to the present. Hear what? Voices. Under the RV. She was already climbing out of bed, moving toward the window. Derek, there are children under our RV. He joined her at the window, pressing his face against the cold glass. The campsite was bathed in moonlight, every detail visible in stark black and white. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Rebecca. Mommy? The voice was faint but unmistakable. Emma's voice coming from directly beneath their feet. Mommy, why did you let us die? Rebecca's scream pierced the night, and Derek heard Nathan bolt upright in the other room. But as quickly as it had come, the voice was gone, leaving only the sound of wind through the trees and the hollow echo of parents' worst nightmares made real. Morning brought no relief. Derek woke to find Rebecca already dressed, sitting at the dinette table and staring at something in her hands. As he approached, he saw what had captured her attention. A crayon drawing on crumpled construction paper, the kind Emma used to make in kindergarten. The drawing showed their family in stick figure form, 2 tall figures and 2 small ones holding hands in front of a house. But there were 2 additional figures in the drawing, smaller and darker, with red crayon scribbled over their faces so violently it had torn through the paper in places. Where did this come from? Derek asked. It was taped to the door when I got up, Rebecca said. Her voice was eerily calm. Along with these, she opened her other hand to reveal 2 small toy cars, Hot Wheels that Derek recognized immediately. Tyler's favorites, the ones that had been buried with him in his tiny casket. Nathan emerged from the back of the RV, his hair disheveled and his eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from a sleepless night. Did you guys hear? The voices, Rebecca finished. We heard them. Not just voices, Nathan said. He held up his old digital camera, the one that had been destroyed in the accident. Derek remembered seeing it shattered on the hospital floor, its memory card scattered in pieces. But here it was, looking brand new, its LCD screen showing a photo that made Derek's blood freeze. In the picture, Emma and Tyler played alone in the forest clearing beside their campsite. They looked exactly as they had in life. Emma with her gap-toothed smile, and Tyler with his perpetually untied sneakers. They were building something from sticks and leaves, concentrating on their work with the serious intensity that only children possessed. The timestamp on the photo read, 2:47 a.m. That's impossible, Derek whispered. Nathan scrolled through more photos, dozens of them, all taken throughout the night. Emma and Tyler running between the trees, sitting by the cold fire pit, standing at the RV windows, their faces pressed against the glass, looking in at their sleeping parents. In the final photo, both children stood directly in front of the camera, so close their faces filled the entire frame. Emma's mouth was open as if she were speaking, and Tyler was pointing at something behind the photographer. The image was perfectly clear except for their eyes, which were completely black. I found it on my pillow this morning, Nathan said. Charged, working perfectly. Sandra appeared from the bathroom, moving with the zombie-like shuffle that had become her normal gait since the accident. But as she passed the window, she suddenly stopped and pressed her face to the glass. Hi, babies, she said, her voice taking on a sing-song quality Derek hadn't heard in 2 years. Mommy's here now. Mommy won't leave you again. Derek rushed to the window. The campsite was empty except for the scattered toys that definitely hadn't been there the night before. A jump rope, a soccer ball, a small pink bicycle that looked exactly like the one Emma had been learning to ride. Sandra, Derek said gently. There's no one there. But Sandra was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since the accident. They said they forgive us, she whispered. They said it wasn't our fault. Derek tried to start the RV an hour later, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The battery was completely dead despite being brand new when they'd picked up the vehicle. His cell phone showed no signal, and neither did anyone else's. They were trapped. That's when Ranger Kellison appeared, walking up the dirt road as if he'd been expecting them to have trouble. "Engine problems?" he asked, but his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "The battery's dead," Derek said, "and we can't get any cell service." Kellison nodded slowly. "Happens more often than you'd think out here. Something about the magnetic properties of the sandstone, they say. Plays hell with electronics." He paused, studying their faces. "How long you folks planning to stay?" "We were supposed to leave this morning," Nathan said. "Were you now?" Kellison's pale eyes seemed to look right through them. "Well, I suppose that's up to you. But I should mention, this campsite has quite a history. Lots of folks come here carrying heavy loads. Parents, mostly. Lost children. Lost chances. Lost time." Derek felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "What do you mean?" "Over the years, I'd say close to 200 people have disappeared from this site. Families, couples, individuals. They come here looking for something. Closure. Peace. Answers. Some find what they're looking for. Others..." He gestured toward the dark caves and the cliff faces. "Others find something else entirely." "You're saying people vanish here?" Rebecca asked. "I'm saying people choose to vanish here," Kellison corrected. "There's a difference. The forest doesn't take anyone who doesn't want to be taken, but it's very good at convincing people they want to be taken." He handed Derek a business card with only a phone number. "When you're ready to leave, really ready, call me. I can get a mechanic out here, but not before you're ready. The forest can sense these things." After he left, they spent the day in tense silence, each of them struggling with their own thoughts. As evening approached, Derek found muddy footprints circling the RV. Small prints that matched perfectly with the shoes Emma and Tyler had been wearing the day they died. That night, the voices came earlier and stayed longer. Children's laughter echoed from the caves. Whispers called their names through the RV walls. And sometime around midnight, Derek could have sworn he heard Emma and Tyler arguing about who got to sleep in the top bunk. The same argument they'd had every night for months before the accident. Rebecca was no longer trying to pretend it wasn't real. She sat at the window talking back to the voices, carrying on conversations with empty air that seemed to make perfect sense to her. "They're hungry," she told Derek. "They've been hungry for such a long time." Derek's flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the cave entrance like a knife through black velvet. He'd been searching for cell service for 2 hours, following a path that seemed to lead deeper into the cliff face rather than higher toward civilization. The logical part of his mind knew he should turn back, but logic had abandoned him sometime around the third night of hearing his dead son's voice calling for bedtime stories. The cave system was larger than he'd expected, with passages branching off in multiple directions. Some were too narrow to squeeze through. Others opened into chambers so vast his flashlight couldn't find the walls. And everywhere, carved into the sandstone, were names and dates going back decades. Sarah Morrison, age 6, never forgotten. Mom and Dad, 1987. Baby Jessica, we're coming to find you. Love Mommy and Daddy, 1995, for Emma Rose. Daddy will always love you, 2003. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, covering every available surface. A monument to parental grief stretching back generations. But as Derek explored deeper, the carvings began to change. The dates became more recent, and the messages more desperate. "We failed you. We're sorry. We're coming." 2019. Feed the children. Feed them what they need. 2021. The hunger never stops. The hunger never stops. The hunger never stops. 2023. Derek's flashlight began to flicker. He shook it, and the beam steadied long enough for him to see what lay ahead. A vast underground chamber filled with scattered human remains. Not ancient bones, but recent dead. Adults in various stages of decomposition, all curled in fetal positions around small empty spaces, as if they'd been protecting something that was no longer there. Among the bodies, Derek found wallets, driver's licenses, family photos. All parents, all carrying pictures of children who would never grow up. The most recent ID belonged to a woman named Jennifer Hayes from Michigan, dated 3 months ago. In her photo, she was smiling beside a little girl with pigtails. A sound echoed through the chamber, children playing. Derek followed it deeper into the cave system until he found something that made his sanity crack like ice in spring. The chamber was enormous, its ceiling lost in darkness. And filling the space were children, hundreds of them, all between the ages of 3 and 10, all playing in the manner of children everywhere. Tag, hide and seek, simple games that filled the air with laughter and joy. But these weren't children. Not anymore. Their skin was pale as cave mushrooms, and they moved with a fluid grace that human joints couldn't achieve. Their eyes reflected Derek's flashlight beam like those of nocturnal animals, and when they smiled, which they did constantly, their teeth were too sharp and too numerous. They noticed him watching and stopped their games. Hundreds of pale faces turned toward him, and the silence was absolute. "Uncle Derek!" one of them called, running toward him with arms outstretched. It looked exactly like Emma, his Emma, but he could see others behind it that also looked like Emma, dozens of them, all perfect copies of his daughter. "You came to play with us," said another, this one identical to Tyler. "We've been waiting so long." More shapes approached from the darkness. Children that looked like every missing kid he'd ever seen on milk cartons, all gathering around him with expressions of pure joy and bottomless hunger. "We're so hungry, Uncle Derek," Emma, who wasn't Emma, said. "The mommies and daddies come, but they only feed us for a little while. We need more. We need you to bring more." Derek ran. He stumbled through the cave system in blind panic, his flashlight cutting crazy patterns in the darkness as the children's laughter followed him. When he finally burst from the cave entrance, gasping and shaking, he found Nathan waiting for him. "You saw them too," Nathan said. It wasn't a question. Derek nodded, unable to speak. "I followed the voices," Nathan continued. "I had to document it. I had to prove it was real." He held up his camera, but his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it steady. "Derek, they made me watch. They made me see what they do to the parents who come here." "What do you mean?" Nathan showed him the camera's LCD screen. The photos were grainy and dark, but Derek could make out shapes in the cave chamber. Adults kneeling on the stone floor while pale figures moved around them. In the next photo, the adults were lying down, their bodies contorted in unnatural positions. The final photo showed only empty spaces where the people had been, and small piles of what looked like dust or ash. "They don't just kill them," Nathan whispered. "They consume them. Everything. The guilt, the grief, the love. They eat it all until there's nothing left but empty shells. And then the shells just dissolve." Behind them, the RV door opened. Sandra emerged, walking with purpose toward the cave entrance. She was carrying a kitchen knife. "Sandra, no!" Derek called, but she didn't seem to hear him. "The babies are hungry," she said in that same sing-song voice. "They need to be fed. They need what we carry inside us." Rebecca appeared behind her, and Derek could see that she, too, was under some kind of influence. Her eyes were unfocused, and she moved with the same dreamy purpose as Sandra. "They explained everything," Rebecca said. "The accident wasn't our fault, but we survived when they didn't. The guilt we carry, it's food for them. It's what keeps them alive down there in the dark. And if we give them enough, they'll let us join our children. Forever." Derek grabbed Rebecca's arm, but she shook him off with surprising strength. "Don't you want to see Emma and Tyler again?" she asked. "Don't you want to hold them and tell them you're sorry?" The temptation was overwhelming. After 2 years of carrying the weight of his children's deaths, the promise of reunion was almost irresistible. But Nathan's photos had shown him the truth. Whatever was in those caves wasn't his children. It was something ancient and hungry that wore their faces like masks. "Rebecca, listen to me," Derek said. "Those things aren't our kids. They're feeding on our grief. They're using our love against us." But Rebecca was already walking toward the caves, Sandra beside her, both of them drawn by voices only they could hear. In the darkness of the cave mouth, Derek could see pale shapes waiting for them. Nathan returned to the RV 3 hours later, his clothes torn and bloody. his eyes wide with a horror that went beyond anything human minds were designed to process. Derek found him sitting on the ground beside the RV, rocking back and forth and making soft, keening sounds. "They're gone," Nathan whispered when Derek approached. "Rebecca and Sandra. They went into the caves willingly. They wanted to feed those things." Derek knelt beside his friend. "What did you see?" "The truth." Nathan's laugh had no humor in it. "The real truth. Derek, those things down there, they don't just look like our children. They are our children, or what our children became after we failed them." Derek felt his world shift. "That's impossible." "Is it? Think about it. The accident was our fault, wasn't it? All four of us in that car arguing about where to go for dinner while you were driving. Rebecca was turning around to yell at the kids to stop fighting. I was on my phone. Sandra was digging through her purse, and you looked away from the road for just a second to change the radio station." The memory hit Derek like a physical blow. He had looked away. Just for a moment, just long enough to punch the preset button for the classic rock station. When he looked back, the oncoming truck was already crossing the center line. "The guilt we carry," Nathan continued. "It's not just guilt. It's a literal piece of our children's souls. When they died, they took part of us with them. And that part, the part that should have protected them, it's still down there in the dark, hungry and angry and waiting for the rest of us to join them." "You're talking crazy." "Am I?" Nathan showed Derek his camera again. The photos were different now, clearer. In them, Derek could see Sandra kneeling in the cave chamber while pale figures moved around her. But the figures weren't consuming her. They were changing her. Her skin was growing pale, her movements becoming fluid and unnatural. "They don't eat the parents," Nathan explained. "They convert them, turn them into lures to attract more grieving families. Sandra's been calling to other parents all day. I can hear her voice in my head, whispering about places where lost children can be found." Derek felt a chill of recognition. The dreams he'd been having for weeks before the trip, dreams of Emma and Tyler calling to him from a dark place, begging him to come find them. Dreams that had led him to research camping spots in Ohio, that had driven him to suggest this specific location. "How long has this been happening?" Derek asked. "Decades, maybe longer. Kellison, he's not a ranger. He's one of them. A parent who lost a child so long ago he's forgotten what he used to be. He guides the grieving families here, helps them make the choice to feed the hunger." As if summoned by his name, Kellison appeared at the edge of their campsite. But now Derek could see what he really was. The pale skin, the too fluid movements, the eyes that reflected light like an animal's. "Having second thoughts?" Kellison asked. "That's natural. The living part of you wants to survive. But the dead part, the part that died with your children, that part knows where it belongs." "You're not human," Derek said. "I was once. Lost my boy Tommy in a drowning accident back in 1962. Came here looking for answers just like you. Found something better, a way to be with him forever." Kellison smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp. "The hunger isn't cruel, Derek. It's love. Pure, distilled parental love that refuses to let go." Nathan stood up suddenly. "I want to see Sandra." "Of course you do," Kellison said. "She's waiting for you. They're all waiting." Derek tried to stop Nathan, but his friend was already walking toward the caves with the same dreamy purpose that had taken Rebecca and Sandra. At the cave entrance, Derek could see shapes moving in the darkness. Human-sized figures with pale skin and fluid movements. One of them stepped into the moonlight and Derek's heart stopped. It was Sandra, but changed. Her skin had the same mushroom pallor as the creatures in the caves, and when she smiled at Nathan, her teeth were needle-sharp. "I've been calling to other families," she said in a voice that was hers but somehow more. "Parents in California whose daughter died in a car accident. A couple in Maine who lost their son to cancer. They're driving here now, following the voices of their children, following my voice." "Sandra," Nathan began. "I'm not Sandra anymore," she said. "I'm what Sandra became when she finally accepted the truth. We failed our children. We let them die. And now we can spend eternity making sure no other children go hungry. Nathan walked toward her, and Derek realized with growing horror that his friend wasn't being controlled. He was choosing this. The guilt and grief had become too much to bear, and the promise of reunion, even a twisted one, was preferable to the endless pain of living. "Don't do this," Derek called after him. Nathan paused at the cave entrance. "You think this is about the supernatural?" he said. "But it's not. It's about love. Broken, guilty, desperate love that refuses to let go. And you're going to feel it too, Derek. You're going to hear Emma and Tyler calling for you, and you're going to walk into that darkness because that's what love does. It makes us follow our children anywhere." He disappeared into the cave, and Derek heard his voice join the chorus of whispers that had been haunting them since they arrived. Derek was alone now, standing beside the RV in the moonlight, surrounded by the voices of everyone he'd ever loved. Emma and Tyler were calling his name from the darkness, begging him to come play with them. Rebecca was promising him forgiveness if he'd just take a few steps forward. Nathan was explaining how good it felt to finally stop fighting the guilt. And somewhere in the growing chorus, Derek could hear his own voice beginning to whisper, calling to other parents in distant cities, promising them reunion with their lost children if they'd just drive to a certain campsite in Ohio. The hunger was spreading, and Derek was becoming part of it. Derek stood at the entrance to the cave system as dawn broke over Hocking Hills, the first gray light revealing the true scope of what surrounded him. The forest floor was littered with abandoned vehicles, RVs, cars, motorcycles, all belonging to parents who had come seeking the same impossible reunion. Some of the vehicles looked decades old, their metal bodies slowly being reclaimed by rust and vegetation. The voices had been calling to him all night. Emma and Tyler, their words sweet as honey and twice as compelling. "Daddy, we're cold down here. Daddy, we miss you. Daddy, why won't you come save us?" But something had shifted in Derek's mind during the long, dark hours. Maybe it was seeing Nathan walk willingly into the caves, or watching Sandra transform into something that wore his friend's face but harbored an alien hunger. Maybe it was the growing realization that the voices, no matter how perfectly they mimicked his children, always said exactly what he most needed to hear. Real children didn't do that. Real children argued and complained and demanded things at inconvenient times. Real children had their own wants and needs that didn't always align with their parents' guilt and grief. These things in the caves, they weren't his children. They were parasites that fed on parental love, growing stronger with each feeding, multiplying with each family they consumed. Derek walked into the cave system, but not to surrender. He carried a flashlight, a hunting knife, and something the creatures couldn't understand: acceptance of an uncomfortable truth. The main chamber was exactly as he'd seen it before, filled with pale figures that wore the faces of every lost child imaginable. They rushed toward him with expressions of joy and hunger, Emma and Tyler leading the charge. "Daddy!" Emma, who wasn't Emma, cried. "You came for us." "We knew you would," Tyler, who wasn't Tyler, added. "We knew you loved us too much to leave us here alone." But Derek didn't kneel down to embrace them. Instead, he did something that shocked both himself and the creatures. He laughed. "You're not my children," he said. "My Emma would be complaining about having to stay in a creepy cave. My Tyler would be asking if we could get McDonald's on the way home. You're just echoes of my guilt, and I'm done feeding you." The creatures' expressions shifted, confusion replacing their manufactured joy. "Daddy, you're scaring us," Emma, not Emma, said. "Good," Derek replied. "Because you should be scared. You've been feeding on grieving parents for decades, growing stronger, multiplying. But you made one mistake. You assumed that love always equals weakness." Derek pulled out the hunting knife, but not to use as a weapon. Instead, he pressed the blade to his own palm, drawing blood. The creatures hissed and backed away as droplets hit the cave floor. "This is what real parental love looks like," Derek said, letting his blood drip steadily. "It's not about never letting go. It's not about following your children into death. It's about accepting that sometimes, despite all your love, despite all your efforts, children die and parents survive, and that's not anyone's fault. The blood was having an effect. Where it touched the cave floor, the stone began to crack and crumble. The creatures' forms wavered, their perfect mimicry of lost children beginning to break down. I failed Emma and Tyler, Derek continued, his voice growing stronger. I looked away from the road at exactly the wrong moment. My children died because of my inattention, and I've been carrying that guilt for 2 years. But carrying guilt and letting it consume me are two different things. More creatures emerged from the deeper passages, not just the child mimics, but the converted parents. Derek saw Rebecca, Nathan, and Sandra among them, their faces pale and their movements unnaturally fluid. Behind them came dozens of others, generations of grieving parents who had been transformed into lures for more victims. "Rebecca," Derek called to his wife's changed form, "do you remember what Emma said to you the morning of the accident, when you were rushing to get her ready for school?" Rebecca, who wasn't Rebecca, paused. For a moment, confusion flickered across her features. She said, "Mommy, you forgot to put jelly on my sandwich." Derek continued, "And you told her to eat it anyway because we were running late. She cried all the way to school. That's the last real memory you have of your daughter. Her crying because you wouldn't take 30 seconds to fix her sandwich." The creature wearing Rebecca's face let out a wail that was part grief and part rage. The perfect mask was cracking, revealing something hungry and alien underneath. "That's who we really were," Derek said, addressing all the converted parents. "We were flawed people who made mistakes. We got impatient with our children. We prioritized our own convenience over their needs. We were human, and humans fail." Derek's blood was now pooling on the cave floor, and the entire chamber was beginning to shake. Cracks spread across the walls and chunks of stone fell from the ceiling. "The accident was my fault," Derek said, his voice echoing through the collapsing chamber. "My children died because I wasn't paying attention. And you know what? I can live with that. I can carry that knowledge without letting it destroy me, or turn me into something that preys on other grieving parents." The creatures were screaming now, their forms dissolving as the cave system collapsed around them. The child mimics were the first to go, their pale bodies crumbling like sand. The converted parents lasted longer, but even they couldn't maintain their stolen forms as Derek's acceptance of responsibility, without the accompanying guilt and self-destruction, poisoned the very foundation of their existence. "I loved my children," Derek said as debris rained down around him, "but I'm not going to follow them into death just to ease my conscience. That's not love, that's selfishness." The last thing Derek saw before the cave entrance collapsed was Sandra, her true form restored for just a moment, mouthing the words, "Thank you," before she dissolved into dust. Derek emerged from the collapsing cave system battered and bloody but alive. The RV started on the first try and his cell phone showed full signal strength. As he drove away from campsite 13, he called the number on Kellison's business card. A young woman answered. "Ohio Department of Natural Resources, how can I help you?" "I'd like to report a dangerous cave system at Hocking Hills State Park," Derek said. "Site 13. It's completely collapsed now, but there should be a warning posted so other campers don't get hurt." "Site 13? The woman sounded confused. "Sir, there is no Site 13 at Hocking Hills. Our sites only go up to 12. Derek disconnected the call and kept driving. He didn't look back. 6 months later, Derek received a letter with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a family from Michigan, the Hayeses, who had disappeared while camping in Ohio. Jennifer Hayes and her husband had lost their young daughter in a drowning accident and had been seeking closure. Attached to the clipping was a handwritten note. "The hunger found a new feeding ground. It always does. But you've given other parents a choice they didn't have before. Some will choose to feed the guilt. Others will choose to live with it. Thank you for showing them the difference." A friend. Derek folded the letter and put it in his wallet next to the last photo he had of Emma and Tyler. A picture of them laughing at something off camera, their faces bright with the unself-conscious joy that only children possess. He still missed them every day. He still carried the guilt of the accident, but he carried it as a human burden, not as food for something that should never have existed in the first place. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the grief threatened to overwhelm him again, Derek would remember the truth that had set him free. Love doesn't mean never letting go. Sometimes love means accepting that holding on too tightly can turn you into something monstrous. The children who had died deserved better than that. They deserved to be remembered as they truly were. Not as perfect angels, but as real, flawed, wonderful human beings who had been loved completely, even by parents who sometimes failed them. That was enough. It had to be enough, because the alternative was caves full of hungry things that wore the faces of the dead, and Derek had seen enough of those to last several lifetimes. The road stretched ahead, leading away from Hocking Hills and toward whatever came next. Derek drove on, carrying his grief like a scar rather than a wound, permanent but no longer bleeding. Behind him in the rearview mirror, the forest grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. But somewhere in those trees, in caves that existed only when grief called them into being, pale shapes were still waiting for the next parents who couldn't bear to let their children go. The hunger was patient. It had time, and there were always more families driving toward their own dark reunions, following voices that promised everything they wanted to hear. The Winnebago's diesel engine rumbled through the pre-dawn Ohio mist as Mitchell Brennan gripped the steering wheel with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since Fallujah 2009. His knuckles, adorned with faded Marine tattoos and fresh scars from bar fights, turned white against the worn leather. In the passenger seat, Kelly methodically organized his psychiatric medications: Zoloft, Trazodone, Prazosin for the nightmares, carefully ignoring the whiskey bottles she knew were hidden throughout the RV's storage compartments. "Take the next exit, honey," Kelly said softly, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone who'd learned to navigate around psychological landmines. "GPS says it's only 20 minutes to the park." Behind them, Thomas Hartwell sat in tense silence, compulsively field stripping and reassembling a Colt 45 with muscle memory that transcended conscious thought. His wife Angela pretended to sleep in the seat beside him, but Mitchell could see her reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes wide open, watching her husband's hands work the familiar metal with the precision of someone who'd killed before. What Kelly and Angela didn't know, what they could never know, was that the three men shared a bond deeper than brotherhood, darker than blood. Ramadi, Iraq, March 15, 2009. House-to-house searches in a sector that had been cleared for weeks. Mitchell's squad had been checking a compound when Thomas heard movement in the back room. The family had been hiding: a father, mother, and 3 children, ages 12, 8, and 6 months. The father, Khalil al-Rashid, had spoken perfect English, begging them in words Mitchell still heard in his dreams. "Please, sir, we are not fighters. My children, they are innocent." But Thomas had been jumpy, hopped up on dextroamphetamine, and 48 hours without sleep. The baby had cried. Someone had mentioned insurgents using children as human shields. And Mitchell, 24 years old and terrified, had made a decision that would haunt 3 families forever. Contact front, weapons free. 5 shots, 5 bodies. A report filed as enemy combatants eliminated during resistance. No witnesses except the 3 Marines who would carry the truth like shrapnel in their souls for the next 15 years. Now, at 52, Mitchell guided the RV through Ohio's rolling hills, the same hands that had pulled the trigger now trembling from withdrawal and guilt. The healing retreat Kelly had organized was actually a suicide pact disguised as couples therapy. This weekend, the 3 men planned to end their torment permanently. The Cuyahoga Valley National Park emerged from the morning mist like something from a darker America, where industrial scars and pristine wilderness existed in uncomfortable proximity. Mitchell steered toward the ledges area, where towering sandstone formations created natural amphitheaters that Kelly had described as perfect for meditation and healing conversations. To Mitchell, they looked like killing fields. The ranger station appeared around a bend, a modest building that seemed older than it should have been. The man behind the counter was Native American, probably Lakota based on his features, with eyes that seemed to catalog every scar and shadow on Mitchell's face. "Joseph Crow Dog," the ranger said, extending a weathered hand. You folks here for camping? Site 12, Mitchell replied. Reserved under Brennan, Crow Dog's expression shifted subtly, and Mitchell felt the familiar paranoia of being evaluated by a potential enemy. The Ledges area. Isolated spot. Most folks prefer the main campground near the river. He studied Mitchell's face with uncomfortable intensity. You carry ghosts of war, brother. This valley knows something about unnecessary violence too. Native families were slaughtered here in 1782. Moravian converts who thought they'd found peace. Mitchell felt his chest tighten, just here for some quiet time with the family. I hope you find the peace you're seeking, Crow Dog said, handing him a park map, or the judgment you deserve. Sometimes they're the same thing. Site 12 sat nestled between towering rock formations that created a natural bowl, hidden from the main park roads by thick forest. As they set up camp in the fading daylight, Kelly pointed excitedly at the sandstone walls. Look at these formations, Mitch. They're like natural trenches, perfect for privacy. Mitchell's blood chilled. The rock formations were almost identical to the urban landscape of Ramadi. Narrow passages, blind corners, elevated positions perfect for ambushes. Thomas was staring at the same formations with recognition in his eyes. That night, Mitchell lay in the narrow RV bed beside Kelly, listening to her breathing and the forest sounds beyond the thin aluminum walls. Somewhere around 3 a.m., exhaustion finally overcame the Prazosan's grip on his nightmares. He was back in Ramadi, but the desert had become Ohio forest. The Al-Rashid family was running between the trees, the father carrying the baby while the mother herded the older children ahead of her. They were all wearing traditional Iraqi clothing, but their faces were pale with terror, and they moved with the desperate speed of prey animals. Please, Khalil al-Rashid called over his shoulder in perfect English. We have done nothing wrong. My children are innocent. But in the dream, Mitchell was hunting them through Ohio's wilderness with the same cold efficiency he'd used in Iraq. His rifle was loaded, his orders were clear, and the family was running out of places to hide among the sandstone formations. He woke to Kelly shaking him, his own screams echoing through the RV. Mitch, you were yelling in Arabic, she whispered. What were you dreaming about? Mitchell sat up, sweat-soaked and shaking. Outside the RV windows, he could swear he saw small shapes moving between the trees. Children running in the moonlight, their voices carrying on the wind like accusations. Just the usual shit, he lied. Sorry I woke you. But as Kelly settled back to sleep, Mitchell stayed awake, watching the forest and remembering Crow Dog's words. Sometimes they're the same thing. Dawn revealed the first signs that something was wrong. Mitchell emerged from the RV to find animal tracks circling their campsite in perfect military formation. Deer, raccoon, and something larger that might have been bear. The tracks formed concentric circles around the RV, as if they'd been under surveillance all night. Kelly discovered the second anomaly when she tried to clean condensation from the windows. Someone, or something, had drawn in the moisture on the glass, stick figures representing 5 people with red X's marked over each one. The drawing was childlike but precise, and it hadn't been there when they'd gone to bed. Probably just local kids, Angela suggested, but her voice carried no conviction. They hadn't seen another human being since leaving the ranger station. Thomas found the third sign when he checked his gear. His ammunition, carefully organized in military specification containers, had been rearranged into a pattern he recognized immediately: GPS coordinates. When he plotted them on his phone, they marked a location in Ramadi, Iraq, the exact address where they'd killed the al-Rashid family. We need to leave, Thomas said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Right fucking now. But when Mitchell tried to start the RV, the engine wouldn't turn over. The battery was dead despite being new, and their cell phones showed no service bars despite having full signal the night before. Angela tried to lighten the mood by photographing the local wildlife during a morning hike, but when she reviewed the images on her camera's LCD screen, she found something that made her stomach drop. The photos showed animals behaving in ways that defied natural instinct. Deer walking in military formation, coyotes observing their campsite with unmistakably human intelligence, and a massive black bear that appeared to be whispering something to a smaller cub. During lunch, a red-tailed hawk dove from the sky and attacked Mitchell with focused fury, its talons drawing blood from his scalp as it screeched a single word over and over. Khalil! 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 The name of the Iraqi father he'd executed 15 years ago. That evening, as darkness fell over the valley, the forest sounds became coordinated in a way that raised every combat instinct Mitchell had developed. Howls, growls, and bird calls formed rhythmic patterns that sounded increasingly like human voices, specifically, like children crying in Arabic. Thomas couldn't take it anymore. Kelly, Angela, there's something you need to know about why we're really here. He unlocked a hidden compartment in the RV and revealed an arsenal that Kelly hadn't known existed. Assault rifles, tactical shotguns, enough ammunition to fight a small war. This isn't a healing retreat, Thomas said, his hands shaking as he loaded a magazine. This is a goodbye. The three of us. We did something in Iraq that we can't live with anymore. We were going to tell you the truth this weekend, then end it. Kelly stared at her husband in horror. And what? Mitchell, what is he talking about? Before Mitchell could answer, the forest around them erupted in coordinated chaos. Animals emerged from the tree line in perfect tactical formation, coyotes executing flanking maneuvers while bears launched frontal assaults on their defensive position. But instead of attacking randomly like wild animals, they moved with military precision, using cover and concealment, communicating with barks and growls that sounded almost like radio chatter. Mitchell recognized the tactics immediately. They were the same ones insurgents had used against his unit in Iraq. A massive crow landed on the RV's roof and spoke in perfect Arabic, its voice carrying the cadence of a grown man. Why did you kill my children? Even without understanding the language, Kelly knew she was hearing an accusation. The siege had begun. The coordinated animal attacks continued through the night, following patterns that Mitchell's military training allowed him to read like a tactical manual. Coyotes established overwatch positions in the rock formations, while bears probed their perimeter for weaknesses. Smaller animals, raccoons, opossums, even field mice, conducted reconnaissance missions, gathering intelligence on their defensive capabilities. But the most disturbing development was when the animals began to speak. A white-tailed deer approached the RV's passenger window around midnight, its eyes reflecting the interior light with impossible intelligence. When it opened its mouth, a child's voice emerged. Female, young, speaking accented English. Mrs. Kelly, your husband told you he was a hero in Iraq, didn't he? Did he tell you how he shot me in the chest while I begged for my mama? Kelly screamed and stumbled backward, but the deer continued speaking with the voice of 8-year-old Yasmin al-Rashid. I was hiding behind my papa when the bad soldiers came. Uncle Mitchell shot papa first, then mama, then my baby sister Noor. I tried to run, but Uncle Thomas caught me. He said American soldiers don't leave witnesses. Angela found recordings on her phone the next morning. Audio files she'd never made, containing conversations in Arabic. When she used a translation app, she discovered they were the final moments of the al-Rashid family, recorded somehow from the perspective of the children as they were murdered. Thomas had a complete psychological break when a raccoon climbed onto the picnic table and spoke with the voice of 12-year-old Ahmed al-Rashid. Uncle Thomas, why did you laugh when you shot my baby sister? She was only 6 months old. What could she have done to America? The animal attacks escalated throughout the day, but when Thomas opened fire with his assault rifle, the bullets passed harmlessly through the creatures. He was shooting at spirits wearing animal bodies, and earthly weapons had no power against the dead. That evening, as the sun set behind the sandstone formations, Joseph Crow Dog appeared at their campsite, as if he'd materialized from the forest itself. You boys served in Iraq, he said. It wasn't a question. Mitchell nodded, no longer seeing any point in denial. This valley has been collecting the guilt of American soldiers for over 200 years, Crow Dog explained. Started with the massacre of Christian Delaware in 1782. Peaceful natives who thought they'd found safety with Moravian missionaries. Colonel David Williamson's men killed 96 of them. Men, women, children, babies, bashed their heads in with mallets after making them kneel and pray. Crow Dog gestured toward the rock formations surrounding them. The spirits of those innocents called out for justice, and the land answered. Over the centuries, soldiers who committed atrocities have been drawn here. The guilt calls to the valley, and the valley calls to them. They come seeking peace and find judgment instead. "What do you want from us?" Mitchell asked. "Not my place to want anything," Crow Dog replied. "But the spirits you brought with you from Iraq, they want what all murder victims want. They want their killers to face consequences." A massive black bear emerged from the tree line, walking upright like a man. When it spoke, the voice was that of Khalil al-Rashid, the father Mitchell had executed. "I was a teacher of English literature at Baghdad University. My children spoke 3 languages. My wife was a doctor who treated American soldiers wounded in IED attacks. We were not insurgents. We were not fighters. We were a family hiding in our home trying to survive your war." The bear's dark eyes fixed on Mitchell with human intelligence and infinite sadness. "You murdered us because you were afraid. Because you were young and scared and someone had told you that all Iraqis were your enemies. But fear is not an excuse for genocide, and youth is not an excuse for war crimes." Around the campsite, more animals emerged. Dozens of them, all moving with purpose, all speaking with human voices. They formed a circle around the RV, creating a tribunal in the wilderness. The dead had come to Ohio to hold court. The trial began at dawn. Animals arranged themselves in a semicircle around the campsite like a jury, while the spirits of the al-Rashid family manifested through different creatures to serve as prosecutors. Kelly and Angela were forced to witness testimony that shattered everything they thought they knew about their husbands. Khalil al-Rashid spoke through the massive black bear, describing his final moments in detail. "Your husband kicked down our door at 0347 hours on March 15, 2009. I raised my hands and spoke in English. We are civilians, we are not armed, please, we have small children. But Mitchell Brennan looked at me like I was less than human and put 3 rounds in my chest." Farah al-Rashid testified through a red fox, her voice carrying the grief of a mother watching her children die. "I begged them in perfect English. I had studied at the American University in Cairo. I offered them money, jewelry, anything to spare my babies. But Thomas Hartwell said, 'Can't leave witnesses, boys,' and shot me in the head while my children watched." The children's testimonies were the most devastating. Ahmed, speaking through a young deer, described watching his parents murdered before being shot himself while trying to shield his baby sister. Yasmin, through a rabbit, told of hiding under her bed until Thomas dragged her out and executed her with a single shot to the head. Baby Noor couldn't speak for herself, but a litter of newborn raccoons positioned themselves in the center of the tribunal, their tiny bodies representing the 6-month-old infant who had been Mitchell's final victim. Throughout the testimony, a gray wolf sat slightly apart from the other animals. When it finally spoke, Kelly recognized the voice of Derek Morrison, the 3rd Marine from their unit who had committed suicide 2 years after returning from Iraq. "I couldn't live with what we did," Derek's spirit said through the wolf. "But killing myself didn't end the guilt. It just trapped me here with them, watching other guilty soldiers get drawn to places like this. The dead don't rest, Kelly. They follow us everywhere we go." Thomas, who had been growing increasingly agitated throughout the trial, finally snapped when baby Noor's testimony was presented through the silent raccoon kits. "They were going to identify us," he screamed at the assembled spirits. "We couldn't risk a fucking international incident. It was wartime. Shit happens in war." The animals fell silent, and the temperature dropped noticeably. When Khalil spoke again through the bear, his voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority. 18 American soldiers were prosecuted for the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. Some served prison time. Some faced court-martial. Justice was possible, even in wartime, but you chose to cover up your crimes rather than face consequences. The Spirit offered them a choice. You can experience exactly what you put us through, hunted through these forests like the animals you are, executed without mercy, without dignity. Or you can try to balance the scales, confess your crimes publicly, make reparations to our surviving family members, Spend your remaining years serving the refugees your war created. Thomas chose death. I can't live with this anymore, he said, then walked deliberately toward the assembled animals. Just make it quick. They didn't make it quick. The coyotes took him first, their teeth finding the same spots where his bullets had found Ahmed. The bears finished what the smaller predators started, recreating the terror and pain he had inflicted on the Al-Rashid family. His screams echoed through the valley until dawn, when the forest finally fell silent. Mitchell and the women were left alone with the spirits, waiting to learn if there was any path to redemption for the living. Mitchell stared at Thomas's remains, scattered across the campsite like broken promises, and made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of choosing death or denial, he pulled out his phone and began recording a video confession. My name is Mitchell James Brennan, United States Marine Corps, service number 2847391. On March 15, 2009, in Ramadi, Iraq, I led a squad that executed 5 unarmed Iraqi civilians: Khalil al-Rashid, age 34, Farah al-Rashid, age 29, Ahmed al-Rashid, age 12, Yasmin al-Rashid, age 8, and Noor al-Rashid, age 6 months. Kelly tried to stop him, but Mitchell continued with the methodical precision of a military after-action report. We filed false reports claiming they were enemy combatants who fired on our position. This was a lie. They were innocent civilians hiding in their home. We murdered them in cold blood and covered it up to avoid consequences. He uploaded the video to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and every social media platform he could access. Then he sent copies to the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, and every major news organization in his phone's contacts. Within hours, the confession had gone viral. The spirits of the Al-Rashid family watched through their animal proxies as Mitchell systematically destroyed his old life. He emptied his bank accounts, $127,000 in savings, and donated every penny to refugee resettlement organizations. He contacted human rights lawyers to help locate surviving members of the Al-Rashid extended family in Iraq and Jordan. Kelly faced her own choice: abandon the husband who had lied to her for 15 years, or stay and help him attempt an impossible redemption. I'm not staying because I forgive you, she told him as news vans began arriving at the park entrance. I'm staying because those children deserve better than your suicide. They deserve to see you spend the rest of your life trying to balance the scales. Angela made a different choice. She packed her belongings and left with Thomas's body, unable to reconcile the man she'd married with the war criminal he'd confessed to being. But before she left, she started her own blog, I Was Married to a War Criminal, a journey through horror and denial. Within a week, Mitchell was arrested by military police and charged with multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and filing false reports. The military tribunal would take months, but he'd already accepted that he would spend his remaining years in prison. The spirits of the Al-Rashid family appeared one final time as Mitchell was being led away in handcuffs. Khalil spoke through the black bear with something approaching peace. Your confession cannot resurrect our bodies or heal our family's grief, but your honesty gives us something we have not had for 15 years. Acknowledgement that we existed, that we mattered, that our deaths were crimes rather than statistics. Joseph Crow Dog watched the arrest from the tree line, then walked to the now empty campsite. The animal spirits had dispersed, their need for justice finally satisfied by truth rather than vengeance. First time in 40 years someone chose confession over death, he murmured to the forest. Maybe there's hope for this country after all. 6 months later, Kelly received a letter forwarded through the refugee organization Mitchell had donated to. It was from Layla al-Rashid, Khalil's niece, who had made it to Detroit as a refugee. Mrs. Brennan, your husband's confession has brought attention to many forgotten war crimes. Other soldiers have come forward. Families in Iraq now have names for the men who murdered their loved ones. This does not ease our pain, but it gives us dignity. Your husband cannot undo what he did. But his willingness to face consequences shows that some American soldiers still have consciences. Continue your work with refugees. Help us rebuild what your war destroyed. That is how you honor my uncle's memory. Layla al-Rashid Mitchell read the letter in his military prison cell, where he would spend the next 25 years of his life. He had nightmares every night, not of the spirits hunting him, but of the family he had destroyed. But now he carried their memory as a responsibility rather than a secret. The real horror hadn't been supernatural at all. It had been the discovery that ordinary people, husbands, fathers, neighbors, were capable of atrocities beyond imagination, and that the only path to redemption lay not in hiding from the truth, but in embracing it completely, even when it destroyed everything they thought they knew about themselves. The Cuyahoga Valley returned to its natural quiet, its ancient stones holding new stories of justice found and prices paid, and somewhere in the forest, the spirits of massacred Delaware children from 1782 rested a little easier, knowing that at least one guilty soldier had finally chosen truth over self-preservation. The hunt was over. The real work of atonement had just begun. The Newmar RV's diesel engine labored through the winding curves of State Route 97 as Dr. Graham Whitfield gripped the steering wheel with hands that trembled from more than road vibration. Behind his designer sunglasses, his eyes carried the hollow stare of a man who kept 847 death certificates locked in his home safe, each one a child killed by KidCure between 2015 and 2018. In the passenger seat, Eleanor methodically organized his cardiac medications into a weekly pill dispenser, the same ritual she'd performed religiously since Graham developed heart problems shortly after leaving Apex Therapeutics. She believed the stress came from early retirement. She had no idea it came from counting dead children. Behind them, Dr. Carolyn Ashworth whispered Catholic prayers under her breath, her rosary beads clicking in rhythm with the road bumps. Her husband Richard read aloud from a medical journal about pharmaceutical accidents, completely unaware that each statistic made his wife flinch as if struck. Harrison Beck sat in apparent calm, reviewing financial documents on his tablet, but his perfectly manicured hands betrayed the slightest tremor. He'd spent $2 million on experimental antidepressants and therapists, desperately seeking medication that would let him sleep without dreaming of small faces. His wife Janet attributed his insomnia to normal post-corporate stress. Diane Kruger, at 46, the youngest of the group, clutched her anxiety medication bottle like a lifeline. She hadn't left her house without an escort in 3 years, not since the anonymous photos started arriving. Pictures of dead children sent by grieving families who'd somehow connected her to their loss. Her partner Sarah believed it was simply executive anxiety from a demanding career in pharmaceutical marketing. None of the spouses knew the truth. None of them understood that their partners weren't retired executives. They were mass murderers in Armani suits. The Mohican State Forest appeared through the windshield like something from America's darker past, where old-growth trees created cathedral spaces that had witnessed centuries of secrets. Graham followed the GPS toward the primitive camping area, driving deeper into forests that seemed untouched by civilization. The ranger station materialized from the shadows, a rustic building that looked far older than the 1960s construction date suggested. The man behind the counter was Native American, probably in his 50s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades watching people carry burdens into these woods. Thomas Clearwater, the ranger said, studying Graham's face with uncomfortable intensity. "You folks here for the executive retreat?" Graham felt a chill. He'd made the reservation under a false name. "How did you—" "Word travels fast in small communities," Clearwater interrupted. 4 former pharmaceutical executives seeking, what did you call it on the phone? Closure? Dr. Ashworth stepped forward. "We're just here for a peaceful weekend. Some old colleagues catching up." Clearwater's expression remained unreadable. "This land was sacred before it was defiled," he said quietly. "Mohican children were buried here for 1,000 years, until white settlers dug up the bones to build farms. The children never left, though. They still play in these forests, looking for other little ones to join their games." He handed Graham a campsite map with coordinates marked in red ink. "Site 47. It's isolated, exactly where the old burial ground used to be. Most fitting for folks carrying your particular burdens." As they drove away, Eleanor noticed her husband's hands shaking more violently. "Graham, are you all right?" "Fine," he lied. The same lie he'd been telling for 5 years. "Just tired." Site 47 sat in a natural clearing surrounded by towering oaks that must have been ancient when the first Mohican children were laid to rest beneath them. As Graham maneuvered the RV into position, he could swear he felt small bones crunching under the massive tires. The sun was setting through the canopy, casting shadows that looked disturbingly like small bodies hanging from branches. Eleanor pointed excitedly at the filtered light. "Look how beautiful this is, Graham, so peaceful. This is exactly what you needed." But as darkness fell over the ancient burial ground, Graham heard something that made his blood freeze. Children laughing in the distance, their voices carried on a wind that smelled of earth and very old secrets. The games were about to begin. Graham woke to the sound of something scattering across the RV's roof like hail. When he investigated at dawn, he found hundreds of colorful KidCure tablets scattered around their campsite, arranged in perfect groups of 847, the exact number of children who had died from his company's miracle ADHD medication. Eleanor discovered the first prescription pad stuck to their door, written in a child's careful handwriting. "Dr. Death, please take fatal dose for being bad to kids. Signed, Emily Chen, age 8, deceased." Dr. Ashworth found her rosary beads replaced with necklaces made of KidCure tablets, each bright pill representing a soul she'd helped consign to an early grave through falsified autopsy reports. Her husband Richard held up the medication necklaces, confused. "Carolyn, where did these come from? Some kind of pharmaceutical promotional material?" She couldn't speak, couldn't explain that Emily Chen had been the first child to die, a second grader whose parents had trusted their family doctor's recommendation of a safe new treatment for her attention problems. Harrison's tablet had been reprogrammed overnight, displaying an endless slideshow of 847 school photos with the message, "We want to play with you forever." Each face smiled with the innocent trust of children who'd believed adults would protect them, not poison them for profit. Diane found her anxiety medications replaced with KidCure tablets. As she almost took one out of habit, a small voice whispered from inside the pill bottle. "Now you'll feel what we felt, Miss Diane. First your heart beats really fast, then it hurts so much you can't breathe. Then you call for Mommy, but she can't help you anymore." That evening, as shadows lengthened through the ancient oaks, they heard what initially sounded like an elementary school playground. Children's laughter, singing games, the innocent cacophony of recess. But as they listened more carefully, the songs became disturbingly familiar. Modified versions of childhood classics. "Ring Around the Rosie," "Pocket Full of KidCure," "Heartbeat Faster, Faster," "We All Fall Down Dead." The spouses found corporate documents hidden throughout the RV, files their partners thought were safely destroyed. Eleanor read internal emails with growing horror. "Graham, this memo says you knew KidCure would kill children before it was even approved. You wrote acceptable losses for market penetration." Janet discovered Harrison's financial projections calculating the optimal death toll that would maximize profits while minimizing legal exposure. 500 million in wrongful death settlements versus 4.2 billion in revenue. Net positive outcome. Sarah found Diane's marketing presentations targeting low-income communities specifically because economically disadvantaged families have limited litigation resources and higher trust in medical authority figures. Richard confronted his wife with pathology reports she'd falsified, changing cardiac arrest due to pharmaceutical toxicity to sudden infant death syndrome, or undiagnosed heart defect. When they tried to leave the next morning, they discovered that small hands had sabotaged their engine. Hundreds of KidCure tablets had been deposited in the fuel tank, turning the diesel into a toxic sludge that would never combust. Thomas Clearwater appeared as if materializing from the forest itself. "The little Mohican spirits found kindred souls," he said quietly. "Children who died far from home, far from their mother's arms. They want justice, and they want to play." That night, the games began in earnest. The children manifested at midnight, not as terrifying specters, but as they had been in life, innocent, playful, trusting. They skipped between the trees singing nursery rhymes, played hide-and-seek behind ancient oaks, and organized elaborate games of tag that seemed to involve the entire forest. But these games had rules the adults didn't understand until it was too late. 8-year-old Emily Chen stepped from the shadows looking exactly as she had in her school photo, pigtails, missing front tooth, Hello Kitty t-shirt. She approached Graham with the grave solemnity children reserve for serious conversations. "Dr. Whitfield, we want to play doctor with you," she said sweetly. "You remember playing doctor, don't you? That's what you did to us." More children emerged from the darkness, 847 of them, each carrying the cause of their death in their small faces. Some had the blue-tinged lips of cardiac arrest. Others showed the telltale signs of arrhythmia or sudden heart failure. All of them had died trusting that the bright cherry-flavored tablets would help them concentrate in school. "We learned a new game while we were waiting for you," said Marcus Williams, age 7, his dark skin ashen from the heart attack that had killed him in a Detroit emergency room. "It's called Truth or Die. Want to play?" The executives had no choice. Emily produced a small notebook filled with childish handwriting, but the content was devastatingly adult in its understanding of corporate malfeasance. "Dr. Ashworth," Emily read aloud, "you changed my cause of death from drug-induced cardiac arrest to congenital heart defect. But I didn't have a heart defect until I took your medicine. Why did you lie about how I died?" Carolyn tried to run, but tiny hands emerged from the earth, the Mohican children buried beneath the campsite, joining forces with KidCure's victims in a coalition of the innocently murdered. "We're going to play a game called How We Died," announced Jamie Rodriguez, age 9, whose parents had mortgaged their house to pay for his funeral. "First, we make your hearts beat really, really fast." Graham felt his chest tighten as his pulse accelerated to dangerous levels. The children giggled and clapped as if they were playing musical chairs. "Then we make it hurt so much you can't breathe." Harrison collapsed, clutching his chest as phantom hands squeezed his heart like a stress ball. The children's laughter grew more excited. "Then you call for Mommy, but she can't help you." Diane screamed for Sarah, but her partner couldn't see the spectral children and thought Diane was having a panic attack. "And then, you don't wake up anymore." But just as the executives felt their hearts stopping, the children would restore them, over and over, forcing them to experience the terror of dying from KidCure without the release of actual death. "This is just the first game," Emily explained cheerfully. "We have 846 more to play, one for each of our friends you killed. We have all the time in the world, and you're never leaving our playground." Through the torture, worse truths emerged. The children, with the perfect memory of the dead, recited internal company documents verbatim. Mr. Beck calculated that children weighing less than 70 pounds had a 23% higher mortality rate, recited David Kim, age 6. So Miss Kruger created advertisements specifically targeting parents of smaller children because their lawsuits would be cheaper to settle. Dr. Whitfield knew that children with pre-existing anxiety disorders were 400% more likely to die from KidCure, added Maria Santos, age 7. But he told doctors to prescribe it to anxious kids first because their parents would blame the death on mental health instead of the medication. The most devastating revelation came from Emily Chen herself. "You didn't just kill us by accident. You made a list of children you expected to die. 2,147 kids who are still taking KidCure right now. You know their names. You know they're going to die in the next 18 months, and you're letting it happen because stopping production would hurt your stock options." The spouses listened in growing horror as their partner's true nature was revealed through the innocent voices of murdered children. By the third night, the children had established what Emily Chen called playground court, a tribunal where 847 dead children would judge the 4 executives using the simple moral framework of elementary school ethics. "In kindergarten, we learned that hurting people is wrong," Emily explained to the assembled spirits and the terrified adults. "We learned that lying is wrong. We learned that taking things that don't belong to you is wrong. Dr. Whitfield, Dr. Ashworth, Mr. Beck and Miss Kruger did all 3 things to us." The trial proceeded with the devastating logic of children who see through adult rationalizations to moral bedrock. Each child testified about their death, but also about how their families had been destroyed by grief, guilt, and bankruptcy from medical bills. Marcus Williams described how his parents divorced after his death, each blaming the other for agreeing to the KidCure prescription. His mother developed alcoholism. His father committed suicide on the second anniversary of Marcus's death. Jamie Rodriguez testified that his younger sister developed severe anxiety after watching him die, convinced that medicine would kill her too. She'd been hospitalized 3 times for panic attacks when doctors tried to treat her legitimate medical conditions. David Kim's parents had spent their life savings on his funeral and the subsequent legal battle. They'd lost their house, their business, and their marriage. His father now lived in his car, and his mother had moved back to Korea, unable to face memories of her dead son in America. But the children's justice system had evolved beyond simple punishment. They'd learned about corporate responsibility, legal precedent, and restorative justice from watching their parents' failed lawsuits. "We don't just want you to die," Emily announced. "Dead people can't save the 2,047 children who are still taking KidCure. We want you to fix what you broke." The children presented their evidence through games that forced the executives to experience exactly what their victims had endured. They played Swallow the Pills, where massive doses of KidCure induced the same cardiac symptoms that had killed 847 children. They played Call Your Mommy, where the executives were forced to phone their own children and grandchildren while experiencing heart attacks, recreating the helpless terror parents had felt watching their children die. Most devastatingly, they played Read the List, forcing each executive to recite the names, ages, and addresses of the 2,147 children currently taking KidCure who were statistically likely to die in the next 18 months. The revelation that shattered even the spouse's remaining loyalty. All 4 executives had family members on that list. Graham's 6-year-old grandson was taking KidCure. Carolyn's niece had been prescribed it for school performance issues. Harrison's daughter had given it to her twin boys. Diane's partner Sarah had started her nephew on the medication just 3 weeks ago. Apex Therapeutics had continued manufacturing KidCure under different corporate names, and the executives' own families had been deliberately targeted for prescriptions as insurance against whistleblowing. "You were going to let your own families die to protect your secret," Emily said with the moral clarity that only children possess. "That's when we knew you weren't human anymore. You were just monsters wearing people suits." The children offered one final game. Truth or consequences. The executives could confess everything publicly and spend their remaining lives trying to save the 2,147 children still at risk, or they could die slowly from the same cardiac failure they'd inflicted on 847 innocents. The choice was theirs, but the children were very good at games, and they'd already decided what the consequences would be for either option. Graham broke first. Faced with the knowledge that his own grandson was slowly being poisoned by his grandfather's greed, he pulled out his phone and began live streaming a confession to Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and every social media platform he could access. "My name is Dr. Graham Whitfield, former CEO of Apex Therapeutics. Between 2015 and 2018, I knowingly manufactured and distributed a pediatric medication called KidCure that I knew would kill children. We falsified safety data, bribed FDA inspectors, and covered up 847 deaths to protect company profits." Emily Chen watched approvingly as Graham systematically destroyed his old life with surgical precision. He provided internal documents, financial records, and a complete list of co-conspirators. He emptied his offshore accounts, $1.7 billion, and transferred the money to a foundation for free cardiac treatment for children from low-income families. There are currently 2,847 children taking KidCure under various brand names who will die in the next 18 months unless the medication is immediately recalled. Their names and addresses are in this database I'm uploading now. Dr. Ashworth followed, surrendering her medical license live on television and confessing to falsifying hundreds of pediatric autopsy reports. She committed to working 18-hour days in community clinics, providing free cardiac care to children damaged by corporate medications. Harrison used his financial expertise to systematically destroy other pharmaceutical companies hiding safety data, becoming the most effective corporate whistleblower in American history. He leaked internal documents from 17 different companies, exposing a network of pediatric drug trials that had been falsified for decades. Diane transformed her marketing skills into global awareness campaigns, creating systems that allowed parents to access real safety data before giving any medication to their children. She spent her own fortune funding independent pediatric drug testing facilities. The spouses faced their own choice: abandon the monsters they'd married or support their redemption as the only way to honor 847 dead children. Eleanor made her decision while watching her grandson play in their backyard, knowing he would have been dead within months if the truth hadn't emerged. "I'm not staying because I forgive you, Graham. I'm staying because those children deserve better than your suicide. They deserve to see you spend every remaining day of your life saving other children." The children's verdict was swift and practical. Emily Chen spoke for all 847 victims. "Your confession cannot bring us back to life or heal our family's pain, but your honesty can save 2,147 children who are still alive. That's not forgiveness, that's mathematics. 847 deaths versus 2,847 lives saved equals justice." Thomas Clearwater revealed himself as the father of Sarah Clearwater, age 9, victim number 463 of KidCure. He'd spent 3 years planning this confrontation, knowing that only supernatural intervention could break through corporate lawyers and regulatory capture. "My daughter visits me in dreams," he told the executives as federal agents arrived to arrest them. "She told me the Mohican children would help her find justice. They kept their promise." The KidCure scandal became the largest pharmaceutical prosecution in American history, leading to global reforms in pediatric drug regulation. All 4 executives received life sentences, but were allowed to serve their time performing medical research in prison, their expertise used to identify other dangerous medications. They aged rapidly under the weight of constant work, but found a strange peace in knowing that each day of labor honored one of the children they'd killed. The spirits visited them regularly, not as tormentors, but as reminders of their ongoing responsibilities. Emily Chen appeared one final time as Graham was being led away in handcuffs. She no longer looked like a suffering ghost, but like the bright second grader she'd been before KidCure stopped her heart. "Thank you for listening to us," she said quietly. "Now other children can grow up and play real games instead of dying games." The forest returned to its natural quiet, the ancient Mohican burial ground finally at peace. But in pharmaceutical boardrooms around the world, executives began receiving anonymous packages containing children's toys and a simple note: "We're watching, we're counting, we remember every name." The real horror hadn't been supernatural at all. It had been the discovery that corporate executives could literally calculate how many children should die to maximize shareholder profits, and that American society had created legal and regulatory systems that made such calculations not just possible, but routine. The only redemption lay in complete transparency, total accountability, and the recognition that some crimes against children are so heinous that they demand a lifetime of atonement. Not because the dead can be brought back, but because the living deserve protection from monsters who wear business suits instead of horror masks. In elementary schools across America, children played new games during recess. Games where everyone gets to go home safely, where medicine helps instead of hurts, where adults tell the truth about what they do for work. The children had won. Justice, it turned out, was a game best played by those too young to accept that some evils are simply the cost of doing business. The luxury Fleetwood RV cut through the winding backroads of southeastern Ohio like a knife through butter, its chrome gleaming despite the dust kicked up from the gravel. Blake Thornton's manicured hands gripped the steering wheel with practiced ease, though if you looked closely, really closely, you'd notice the faint scars across his knuckles. Battle wounds from a youth he'd buried beneath 30 years of respectability. "Turn left at the old Miller barn," Christine said from the passenger seat, her voice carrying that particular brand of forced cheerfulness reserved for situations she didn't quite understand. She flipped through a photo album from their 1994 graduation, unconsciously skipping past certain pages where faces should have been but weren't. "I still can't believe you boys planned this reunion camping trip. It's so outdoorsy." Behind them, Dr. Ethan Carlisle quietly dry swallowed another Xanax, his third in 2 hours. His wife Maria chatted obliviously about how Ethan hasn't been the same since that terrible car accident that killed that poor black boy our senior year. She shook her head sadly. Such a tragedy. What was his name again? Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Marcus Washington, he whispered. That's right. Poor Marcus. Maria returned to her romance novel, missing the way her husband's hands trembled as he reached for another pill. Judge Preston Murphy sat hunched over his laptop in the dinette, obsessively reviewing case files, dozens of hate crime cases he'd systematically dismissed or minimized over his 25-year career on the bench. His wife Linda read aloud from her tablet about recent racial justice initiatives, blissfully unaware of how each word made her husband flinch like he'd been slapped. Listen to this, honey, Linda said. They're finally investigating cold cases from the 90s, isn't that wonderful? Justice delayed but not denied, right? Preston's fingers froze over the keyboard. Right, he managed. In the back, Vance Kellerman appeared the most relaxed of the group, feet up on the opposing seat, designer sunglasses hiding eyes that hadn't slept peacefully in 3 decades. His real estate empire had been built on a foundation his wife Rachel would never suspect. Buying properties from black families for pennies on the dollar after carefully orchestrated intimidation campaigns. You know what I love about you, Vance, Rachel said, stroking his arm. You're such an ethical businessman. In a world full of sharks, you've always done right by people. If she'd been looking, she might have seen his jaw clench. Instead, she returned to planning their next charity gala for urban youth development. The sun hung low on the horizon as they pulled into the Wayne National Forest campground, painting the ancient oaks in shades of blood orange. A young ranger emerged from the station, tall, athletic, with skin the color of rich coffee and eyes that seemed to see straight through you. Welcome to Wayne National Forest, the ranger said, his smile not quite reaching those penetrating eyes. His name tag read J. Davis. Y'all here for the reunion? The 4 men exchanged glances. They hadn't mentioned any reunion in their reservation. Just old friends catching up, Blake said carefully. Ranger Davis nodded slowly. Of course. Well, you gentlemen are in Site 23. Same spot as always. He handed Blake a map with a red X marked on it. Right by the old hanging tree. Y'all know the one. Christine frowned. Hanging tree? That sounds ominous. Oh, it's just local folklore, ma'am, Davis replied, but his eyes never left the 4 men. Legend says a young man was lynched there back in the 90s. Marcus Washington, 18 years old, happened right around graduation time, June 23, 1994, to be exact. He paused. Funny thing is, the case was ruled an accidental death. Car crash, they said. Though folks around here always wondered how a boy ends up hanging from a tree after a car accident. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ethan's pill bottle clattered to the floor. Well, Blake said, his voice artificially bright, we should get set up before dark. Absolutely, Davis agreed. Y'all have a good night now. Hope you find exactly what you came looking for. As they drove deeper into the forest, none of the women noticed how their husbands had gone pale as bone china. Site 23 sat in a clearing surrounded by towering oaks, their branches forming a natural cathedral overhead. In the center stood one tree that dwarfed the others, a massive oak with a distinctive scar running down its trunk like a lightning bolt, or like a rope burn. What a beautiful spot, Maria exclaimed as they began setting up. So peaceful. But peace was the last thing the 4 men felt as they stared up at that scarred oak. They remembered this tree. They remembered the rope. They remembered the screaming. As night fell and the campfire crackled, the first signs appeared. Christine was the first to notice. Blake, honey, did you hang those decorations? Everyone looked up. There, swaying gently from a low branch just at the edge of the firelight, hung 3 lengths of rope, each one tied in a perfect hangman's noose. That's not possible, Preston stammered. We just set up camp. Maybe it's part of the folklore, Linda suggested. You know, like a historical marker? But Blake knew better. They all did. Those knots were exactly like the ones they'd tied 30 years ago. The same pattern Blake's grandfather had taught him. the same knots that had tightened around Marcus Washington's throat as he begged for his life. "I'm sure it's nothing," Blake said, but his voice cracked on the last word. That night, as the women slept peacefully in the RV, the four men lay awake listening to sounds that shouldn't exist. Footsteps circling their campsite, the creak of rope under weight, and worst of all, barely audible above the wind, the sound of someone singing. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root. Blake shot upright, his heart hammering. He knew that voice. Impossible, but he knew it. Outside, something scraped against the RV's hull. Long, deliberate scratches like fingernails on metal. But when Blake worked up the courage to look out the window, he saw only darkness and the gentle sway of those three nooses, somehow multiplied into dozens, hanging from every tree like macabre Christmas ornaments. By morning, they would discover that their tires had been slashed, not with a knife but with rough rope that left hemp fibers embedded in the rubber. The same type of rope they'd bought at Morrison's Hardware 30 years ago. But that was just the beginning. Marcus Washington had been waiting 3 decades for this reunion, and he intended to make it unforgettable. As the sun rose on what would be their last morning of innocence, Ranger Davis appeared at their campsite like he'd materialized from the forest itself. "Sleep well, gentlemen?" he asked, and for the first time, his smile was genuine. Cold as winter, but genuine. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about this place, about justice delayed, about debts that come due with interest." He paused, studying each of their faces. "About how some secrets never stay buried, no matter how deep you dig the grave." Christine emerged from the RV, yawning. "Oh, hello, officer. We seem to have had some trouble with our tires." Davis nodded. "Yeah, that happens sometimes. Usually to folks who have something on their conscience." His radio crackled with static, but underneath it, clear as day, came a voice none of them would ever forget. "Tell them I'm coming home." The women heard only static, but the four men heard Marcus Washington, 18 years old forever, calling from whatever hell they'd sent him to, and they knew their 30-year reprieve was over. The real horror was just beginning. Day 2. The photographs. Christine found the first photograph while cleaning up breakfast dishes. It had been slipped under the RV's door sometime during the night. A Polaroid of 4 young men in graduation caps, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. But there was a 5th person in the photo, a young black man with kind eyes and a gentle smile standing right between Blake and Ethan. "Blake," she called, holding up the photo. "Who is this? I've never seen this picture before." Blake dropped his coffee cup. It shattered against the metal steps, sending ceramic shards and hot liquid everywhere. I don't know where that came from," he stammered, but his eyes were locked on Marcus Washington's face. In the photo, Marcus looked so alive, so full of promise. Nothing like the broken, terrified boy they'd left hanging from that tree. Ethan snatched the photo from Christine's hands, his face white as paper. "It's probably just some old shot someone found. You know how these things turn up." But even as he spoke, more photos were appearing. Maria found one taped to the bathroom mirror. The 5 boys at prom, Marcus in a tuxedo that probably cost his family a month's wages, his arm around a beautiful white girl Blake had dated sophomore year. The girl Blake had been obsessed with. The girl whose honor Blake claimed he'd been defending when they'd cornered Marcus in the woods. Preston discovered a photo tucked into his legal files, Marcus in his cap and gown, accepting an academic achievement award. Preston remembered that ceremony. He remembered how his father had muttered racial slurs under his breath as Marcus walked across the stage, how Preston had laughed along to fit in. "Why do you have pictures of that boy who died?" Linda asked, genuine confusion in her voice. "I don't," Preston said quickly. "Someone's playing a prank." But they kept coming. Vance found a photo in his briefcase. Marcus working construction over the summer, shirtless and sweating, sending money home to his grandmother. Money that should have gone to college. Money that should have bought him a future they'd stolen from him. "This is getting weird," Rachel said, studying the photo. "He was really handsome, wasn't he? It's so sad he died so young." By noon, the photographs covered every surface in the RV like wallpaper from hell. Marcus at 5, gap-toothed and grinning. Marcus at 10, in a Little League uniform 3 sizes too big. Marcus at 15, holding a trophy for academic excellence. Marcus at 17, dancing with his mother at her church. Marcus at 18, 3 days before they killed him, laughing with friends at a graduation party. A life in photographs. A life cut short. A life they'd erased from their own memories until now. "Make them stop," Ethan whispered, popping another Xanax. "Please, just make them stop." But Marcus Washington wasn't done with them yet. As the sun set on their second day, the temperature began to drop rapidly. Frost formed on the RV's windows despite the June heat. And in that frost, like invisible fingers writing in condensation, words began to appear. "You remember now." The women saw only random patterns in the moisture, but the 4 men read the message clearly, written in a handwriting they recognized from high school essays and love notes Marcus had written to that white girl who'd been the catalyst for everything. That night, the singing started again, but this time it wasn't coming from the forest. It was coming from inside the RV itself, drifting up through the ventilation system like smoke from hell. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home. Maria sat up in bed. "Do you hear that, Ethan? Someone's singing." Ethan was rigid beside her, tears streaming down his face. "I hear it," he whispered. "Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus." In the dinette, Preston's laptop screen flickered and changed. His legal files were gone, replaced by newspaper clippings from 1994. Headlines he'd worked so hard to suppress. Local teen dies in tragic accident. Marcus Washington, 18, killed in car crash, police rule. Death accidental. But someone had crossed out accidental in red ink and written lynching in that same familiar handwriting. Blake found himself drawn outside by an invisible force. The hanging tree loomed before him, and carved deep into its bark were fresh words. Blake Thornton, sheriff's son, led the lynching. Ethan Carlisle, doctor's son, falsified the death certificate. Preston Murphy, judge's son, buried the evidence. Vance Kellerman, mayor's son, recorded it all. And below that, in letters that seemed to bleed sap, Marcus Washington, nobody's son, died innocent. Blake? Christine's voice came from behind him. She was reading the words carved in the tree, her face a mask of growing horror. "Blake, what does this mean?" But Blake couldn't answer, because hanging from the tree now wasn't just rope, but a noose with something in it. Something that looked suspiciously like his old sheriff's badge, the one he'd been wearing the night they killed Marcus Washington. The badge his father had given him, the badge that had made him feel powerful enough to become judge, jury, and executioner of a boy whose only crime was loving the wrong girl. Behind him, he heard Christine gasp. Then Maria. Then Linda and Rachel, all of them emerging from the RV, all of them seeing the truth carved into the bark of that scarred oak tree. "Oh my God," Rachel whispered. "What did you do? What did you all do?" But the worst was yet to come, because as the clock struck midnight on their second night in Wayne National Forest, Marcus Washington himself stepped out from behind the hanging tree. He looked exactly as he had at 18, except for the rope burns around his throat and the accusation in his dark eyes. "Hello, boys," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of injustice. "Did you miss me?" Day 3. The truth revealed. Marcus Washington stood in the clearing as solid as any living man, moonlight illuminating the rope burns that circled his throat like a collar of accusation. He was exactly as he'd been at 18, tall, lean, with the kind eyes that had made Blake's girlfriend fall in love with him, and the gentle smile that had infuriated 4 racist boys raised on hate. "No," Blake whispered, backing toward the RV. "You're dead. You died 30 years ago." "I did die," Marcus agreed, his voice eerily calm. "Right here, on this tree." while you four held the rope and watched me beg for my life. Do you remember what you said to me, Blake? What you all said while I choked?" The four women stood frozen, their faces pale with dawning comprehension. Christine grabbed Blake's arm. "Blake, what is he talking about? What rope?" But Blake couldn't speak. None of them could, because they were all remembering now. The night that had shaped their entire lives. The secret that had bound them together in guilt and success. Marcus turned to address the women directly. "Your husbands never told you about me, did they? About what really happened June 23rd, 1994? "There was a car accident," Maria said weakly. "A boy died. It was tragic, but—" "No car accident," Marcus interrupted. "They lynched me, right here, under this tree, because I was dating a white girl and they couldn't stand seeing a black boy happy." He gestured to the four men, who were now huddled together like the scared teenagers they'd once been. Blake brought the rope. Ethan brought his father's camera to document it. Preston brought legal documents he'd stolen from his father's office to help cover it up. And Vance brought the gasoline. Gasoline? Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. Marcus nodded. "They didn't just hang me. They tortured me first. Burned me with cigarettes. Broke my fingers one by one. Called me every racial slur they could think of. Made me beg for my life while they laughed." His eyes fixed on each man in turn. 3 hours. That's how long it took me to die. 3 hours of agony while you four debated whether to kill me quick or make it last. Christine was shaking now, tears streaming down her face. "Blake, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't—" "He can't," Marcus said gently. "Because it is true. Every word. And for 30 years they've built their lives on my death. Blake became sheriff, just like his daddy. Used his badge to plant drugs on black kids, frame innocent men, protect white criminals. How many lives did you destroy, Blake? How many Marcus Washingtons did you create?" Blake's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, sobbing. Marcus turned to Ethan. "Dr. Carlisle, you falsified my death certificate, didn't you? Listed it as vehicular trauma instead of lynching. Then you went to medical school and spent 30 years conducting unauthorized experiments on black patients. Poor people who couldn't fight back. People who reminded you of me." Ethan was hyperventilating now, clutching his chest. I tried to help people." "You tried to ease your guilt," Marcus corrected. "But it never worked, did it? That's why the pills. That's why you can't sleep. That's why you see my face in every black patient who comes through your hospital." He moved to Preston. "Judge Murphy, you've spent 25 years on the bench, and in all that time you've never convicted a single white man of a hate crime. Dozens of cases, dozens of black victims, and somehow the evidence always gets dismissed. The charges always get reduced. Justice delayed is justice denied, isn't that right?" Preston was crying now, his shoulders shaking. "I tried to be fair. You tried to protect yourself," Marcus said. "Every time you saw a case like mine, you were terrified someone would start digging, start asking questions about the boy who supposedly died in a car crash but ended up hanging from a tree." Finally, he turned to Vance. "And you, the businessman, built your empire by terrorizing black families into selling their homes for nothing. Anonymous threats, mysteriously dead pets, crosses burned on lawns. Sound familiar? It should. You learned from the best, your own experience with me." Rachel was backing away from her husband now, horror replacing love in her eyes. "Vance, please tell me this isn't true. Please." But Vance couldn't meet her gaze, because Marcus wasn't finished. "The worst part," Marcus continued, his voice growing harder, "is that you recorded it. Vance brought his father's video camera that night. He filmed my death, all 3 hours of it. And you've kept that tape, haven't you, Vance? Hidden in your safe at home, your insurance policy in case the others ever tried to throw you under the bus." The silence that followed was deafening. "Show them," Marcus commanded. "No," Vance whispered. "Show them." The word came out with supernatural force, and suddenly Vance was moving against his will, pulling out his phone. accessing a cloud storage account the others didn't know existed. On the screen, grainy footage began to play. 4 19-year-old boys surrounding a terrified young black man in graduation robes. The women watched in horror as their husbands' younger selves revealed their true nature. Blake punching Marcus in the face, breaking his nose. Ethan holding Marcus down while they bound his hands. Preston reading a mock death warrant full of racial slurs. Vance behind the camera, directing the violence like a sick movie. And through it all, Marcus begging, pleading for his life, promising he'd leave town, promising he'd never see the white girl again, promising anything if they'd just let him live to see his 19th birthday. They hadn't listened. They'd beaten him unconscious, revived him with cold water, and beaten him again. They'd carved racial slurs into his chest with a hunting knife. They'd urinated on him while he was helpless. They'd made him watch while they burned his cap and gown, destroying his dreams of college literally before his eyes. And then they'd thrown the rope over the branch and made him stand on a wooden crate while they fitted the noose around his neck. "Any last words, boy?" Blake's 19-year-old voice asked from the phone speaker. On the video, Marcus looked directly into the camera. "I forgive you," he whispered. "I forgive all of you. But God won't." Then they'd kicked the crate away. The video ended with Vance documenting their cleanup, loading Marcus's car with his body, driving it to Miller's Creek, pushing it into the water to stage the accident. 4 boys becoming 4 monsters in one night, bound together by shared evil. The women were inconsolable now. 30 years of marriage, 30 years of building lives with men they'd never really known. Men who'd built their success on the broken body of an innocent boy. "Why?" Christine sobbed. "Why did you do it?" Blake finally found his voice. "She chose him over me, Sarah Jenkins. She was supposed to be mine, and she chose him, a black boy, over me. I couldn't let that stand." "So you killed him," Linda said flatly. "You murdered a child because he was dating a white girl." "We were kids too," Preston said weakly. "We didn't know what we were doing." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You planned it for weeks. Studied lynching techniques online. Bought the rope in 3 different stores so no one would remember. Chose this spot because it was isolated. You knew, Preston. You all knew." The temperature was dropping again, frost forming on the grass despite the summer heat. The hanging tree began to creak and sway, though there was no wind. 30 years, Marcus said, his form beginning to flicker and waver like a candle flame. 30 years I've been waiting. 30 years of watching you build lives and careers and families on my grave. 30 years of seeing you prosper while my grandmother died of grief. While my mother drank herself to death. While my little sister grew up thinking her big brother abandoned her because he was ashamed of his family. His voice was rising now, carrying the weight of 3 decades of injustice. But now it's time for justice. Real justice. The kind you denied me in life. The kind the courts would never give me in death. The hanging tree's branches began to move, reaching down like grasping fingers. New ropes appeared, sprouting from the wood like some obscene fruit. "An eye for an eye," Marcus said. "A life for a life, but not just yours. Oh no, you've created so much more death since mine. So much more pain. So many more victims." Around the clearing, other figures began to appear. Shadowy forms at first, then becoming clearer, dozens of them. All black, all young, all bearing the marks of violence and injustice. "Meet your other victims," Marcus said. The boy Blake framed for drug dealing who died in prison. The woman Ethan let bleed out because he was too busy to treat her. The teenager Preston sent to adult prison where he was murdered by Aryan Brotherhood inmates. The family Vance terrorized until the father had a heart attack. More figures appeared, and more. A growing crowd of the dead, all bearing witness. "We've all been waiting," Marcus said. "Waiting for justice, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for you to pay the price you've owed for 30 years. The ropes were dropping now, forming nooses that swayed hypnotically in the supernatural wind. 4 nooses, 4 perfect knots. Choose, Marcus commanded. Die now, quick and clean, or live and face what you've done. Live and make amends. Live and try to repair the damage you've caused. Blake looked up at the nooses, then at his wife's tear-stained face. What kind of life would that be? Everyone knowing what we did? The kind of life I'll never have, Marcus replied simply. I'll never survive the scandal, Preston whispered. My career, my reputation. Your reputation was built on my bones, Marcus said. Time to build something new. Ethan was shaking so hard he could barely stand. The medical board will revoke my license. My patients will finally get honest treatment from someone who isn't haunted by guilt. Only Vance remained silent, staring at the video still playing on his phone. Over and over, Marcus's final words, I forgive you, but God won't. I choose life, Vance said suddenly. I choose to live and make amends, however long it takes, whatever it costs. Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Your wife will leave you. Your children will hate you. Your business will crumble. You'll spend the rest of your life working for minimum wage, giving every penny you earn to the families you destroyed. Is that a price you're willing to pay? Vance looked at Rachel, saw the disgust and betrayal in her eyes, and nodded. Yes. Ethan stepped forward next. I choose life too. I'll surrender my license, testify against myself if necessary. I'll spend whatever years I have left trying to undo the harm I've done. Maria was sobbing, but she nodded. I'll help you. We'll face this together. Preston looked at the noose swaying above him, then at his wife. Linda? Linda's voice was steel. I'll stand by you if you make this right. If you spend every day for the rest of your life fighting the system you helped corrupt. But if you take the easy way out, she gestured to the rope. Then you're not the man I thought I married anyway. Preston nodded slowly. I choose life and justice. Real justice this time. All eyes turned to Blake. He was still on his knees staring up at the hanging tree. 30 years, he whispered. 30 years of lying, of hiding, of being afraid someone would find out. I'm so tired. Christine knelt beside him. Blake, please, choose to live. Choose to be better. But Blake was already standing, walking toward the noose. Some sins are too big to come back from, Christine. Some debts can only be paid one way. Blake, no. But he was already climbing onto the wooden crate that had appeared beneath the rope, already fitting the noose around his own neck. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I'm sorry I took your life. I'm sorry I wasted mine. Marcus watched sadly as Blake kicked the crate away. The rope held. Blake's body swayed in the supernatural wind, and for a moment, the two of them, lyncher and lynched, hung together in the moonlight. Now you know what it feels like, Marcus said softly. Then Blake's form began to fade, becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone. Only the rope remained, swaying empty in the breeze. The other spirits began to fade as well, their witness complete. But Marcus remained, solid and real, studying the three surviving men and their wives. This is just the beginning, he told them. Tomorrow you'll drive out of this forest and face the world. You'll confess your crimes, face your consequences, and spend whatever time you have left trying to balance the scales. It won't be enough. It can never be enough. But it's a start. He began to fade as well, but his voice remained clear. I'll be watching. All of us will be watching. If you try to run, if you try to hide, if you try to lie your way out of this, we'll be back. And next time, there won't be a choice. As the sun rose on their third day in Wayne National Forest, Christine drove the RV out alone while the three surviving men sat in the back, writing confession letters and calling lawyers. Behind them, the hanging tree stood sentinel in the growing light, its scarred trunk bearing fresh words carved deep into the bark. Marcus Washington, 1976-1994, finally free. By noon, The story would break nationwide. By evening, the Wayne County prosecutor would reopen dozens of cold cases. By the end of the week, 3 respected pillars of the community would be awaiting trial for crimes spanning 3 decades. The forest was quiet again, but not empty. Marcus Washington had found his peace at last, not through vengeance, but through justice. And in the wind that rustled through the leaves of the hanging tree, visitors would sometimes hear singing, not the mournful spirituals of the oppressed, but something new, something that sounded almost like forgiveness, but only almost, because some debts take more than a lifetime to repay, and some truths are too heavy for the living to bear alone. The dead, after all, have nothing but time. The Winnebago's tires crunched over fallen leaves as Ronald Patterson navigated the winding roads through southern Ohio's rolling hills, his hands trembling not from the steering wheel's vibration, but from the weight of 23 suicide notes hidden in his home office safe, each one specifically mentioning how he and his administration had failed to protect the writer from daily torment. In the passenger seat, Margaret methodically organized photo albums from their golden years in education, unconsciously skipping pages where the faces of dead students should have appeared. She'd trained herself over decades not to see certain photographs, not to remember certain names, not to ask why her husband kept a locked filing cabinet in their basement. Behind them, Philip Donovan obsessively reviewed legal transcripts from lawsuits that had been quietly settled out of court, while his wife Susan read articles about modern bullying prevention, without noticing how her husband flinched at every statistic about teen suicide. Lawrence Mitchell sat in apparent calm, but the bags under his eyes told the story of chronic insomnia that had plagued him for 15 years, ever since the first student had begged for help in his counselor's office, only to be sent back to the predators who tormented them daily. His wife Carol attributed his sleeplessness to post-career burnout, having no idea that her husband was haunted by the faces of children who had trusted him to protect them. Dorothy Reeves, at 61, the oldest of the group, clutched her anxiety medication and cast nervous glances at every passing car. She knew the families of their victims followed her, had been sending photographs of their dead children to her house for years. Her husband Frank dismissed them as disturbed parents who couldn't let go, never understanding that his wife had systematically helped cover up the torture that drove their children to suicide. None of the spouses knew the truth. None of them understood that their partners weren't retired educators. They were accessories to the murder of 23 children whose only crime had been asking adults for protection. Tar Hollow State Forest emerged from the autumn twilight like something from America's darker past, where old-growth trees created cathedral spaces that had witnessed too many last breaths. The forest was painted blood red by the setting sun, casting shadows that looked disturbingly like bodies hanging from branches. The ranger station appeared around a bend, a modest building that seemed to carry more weight than its simple construction should bear. The young man behind the counter was Hispanic, probably mid-20s, with eyes that held the particular grief of someone who'd lost family to preventable tragedy. "Kevin Torres," the ranger said, studying Ronald's face with uncomfortable recognition. "You folks here for the educational retreat?" Ronald felt his chest tighten. The reservation had been made under false names. "How did you—" "Your photos were in the newspaper when my brother died," Kevin interrupted quietly. "Daniel Torres, Westfield Academy, class of 2008. He hung himself from a tree not far from where you'll be camping." Philip stepped forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "We're just here for a quiet weekend, some old colleagues catching up." Kevin's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried an edge of barely controlled anger. "This place has heavy history. In 1978, 6 teenagers hung themselves from these trees. All of them had been expelled from their schools for being problematic. People say they still wander here, looking for the adults who failed them." He handed Ronald a campsite map with coordinates marked in red ink. "Site 23. It's isolated right where they found the first body in 1978. Seems fitting for folks carrying your particular educational philosophy." As they drove toward the campsite, Margaret noticed her husband's increasing agitation. "Ron, you look pale. Are you having chest pains again?" "Just tired," he lied. The same lie he'd been telling since Emma Hartley's suicide in 2003, the first student whose death he could have prevented if he'd believed her reports of sexual assault instead of dismissing her as a dramatic attention seeker. Site 23 sat in a natural clearing surrounded by towering oaks that bore the scars of old rope burns on their lower branches. As Ronald positioned the RV, he felt the familiar tightness in his chest that accompanied memories of finding students' bodies, a sensation he'd experienced 6 times during his tenure as principal. The sun disappeared behind the canopy, and darkness fell with unusual swiftness. Margaret pointed at the shadows dancing between the trees. "Look at this beautiful setting, Ron. So peaceful. This is exactly the kind of reflection time you needed before that documentary airs." But Ronald heard something in the wind that made his blood freeze. Adolescent voices whispering names and addresses, reciting personal information about his current family, with the methodical precision of students who'd done their homework. The lesson plan was about to begin. Ronald woke to find school papers scattered across the RV floor, assignments he recognized from decades past, written by students who no longer existed. The handwriting was achingly familiar. Neat cursive that had once filled his inbox with pleas for help that he'd systematically ignored. Margaret discovered the first essay taped to their bedroom door, written on blood-stained notebook paper. Why Nobody Listens by Emma Hartley, grade 10. Mr. Patterson called me a lying drama queen when I reported that Jason Miller and his friends cornered me in the equipment shed, and I can't write what they did. When I showed him the bruises, he said I probably fell downstairs. When I showed him the photographs they took, he said I must have put myself in that situation. I tried to tell my parents, but they trust Mr. Patterson more than they trust me. I have nowhere left to turn, no one left to tell. Tomorrow I'm going to stop trying. Below the essay, in Emma's careful handwriting, was today's date and a simple message. 15 years later. Still waiting for someone to listen? Philip found his confidential files rewritten in what looked like dried blood, where previous entries read, "Problem resolved," and "Student counseled." The new text read, "Child condemned to death," and "Victim silenced for donor protection." Lawrence discovered audio recordings on his phone, sessions from his counseling office where his own voice could be heard systematically blaming victims and protecting their tormentors. "Tyler, if you don't want to be bothered by other students, maybe you should try fitting in better. Have you considered that your differences might be making other children uncomfortable? Perhaps some speech therapy to address that lisp, or some weight loss to help with your self-esteem?" The recording continued with Tyler Williams, age 14, begging through tears. "Mr. Mitchell, they put dog feces in my locker every day. They filmed themselves doing it and posted it online. Everyone at school has seen it. I can't take it anymore." Lawrence's voice responded with clinical detachment. "Tyler, we've discussed your tendency toward dramatic exaggeration. I think what you're experiencing is normal teenage social dynamics. You need to develop thicker skin." Tyler had hung himself 6 weeks later. Dorothy found medical records she'd falsified spread across the RV's dinette table. Official documents where she'd classified broken noses as accidental falls, fractured ribs as sports injuries, and cigarette burns as cooking accidents. Beside each falsified report was a death certificate. Every student whose injuries she'd helped cover up had eventually committed suicide. That evening, as darkness settled over the forest, they heard what initially sounded like a study group, adolescent voices reciting lessons with the focused intensity of students preparing for exams. But as they listened more carefully, the content became chilling. Ronald Patterson, 1247 Maple Street, married to Margaret. Grandson Tyler, age 12, attends Jefferson Middle School. Walks home alone on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Philip Donovan, 856 Oak Avenue. Daughter Sarah teaches 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary. Stays after school until 6 p.m. to grade papers. Parks in the unlit back lot. Lawrence Mitchell, 2103 Pine Street. Son Michael works late shifts at Memorial Hospital. Takes the same route through downtown every night at 11:30 p.m. The voices were compiling detailed intelligence on their families with the methodical precision of students who'd learned that homework could be a matter of life and death. When they tried to leave the next morning, they found messages etched into the RV's windshield as if carved by fingernails. "You failed us. Now it's our turn to fail you." Kevin Torres appeared as they stood staring at the vandalized vehicle, but his presence no longer felt coincidental. "My brother Daniel begged you for help for 3 years," he said quietly. "Showed you photos of what they did to him, brought witnesses, filed formal complaints. You called him disruptive and expelled him 2 weeks before he hanged himself." Ronald's voice caught in his throat. "Kevin, I'm sorry if—" "Don't." Kevin's eyes held 15 years of accumulated grief and rage. "He left a suicide note. Want to know what it said? Mr. Patterson told me that maybe school wasn't the right fit for troublemakers like me. He was right. Nothing is the right fit for troublemakers like me." The ranger walked away, leaving them stranded at a campsite that felt increasingly like a classroom where they were about to receive the education they'd denied others. The wives found their husbands' hidden files that evening, boxes of evidence that had been locked away in basement storage rooms and office safes for decades. Margaret read transcripts of administrative meetings where the four had deliberately crafted policies protecting wealthy bullies while silencing their victims. "Listen to this," Margaret said, her voice shaking as she read from a 2006 meeting transcript. "Ronald, the Morrison donation is crucial for the new gymnasium. If we suspend their son Jason for the alleged incident, we risk losing $2 million in funding. I suggest we handle this through alternative disciplinary channels." Philip agreed. The victim's family lacks the resources for significant legal action, and the girl has a history of attention-seeking behavior according to her file. Susan found evidence that Philip had maintained secret dossiers on every student family, collecting personal information to use as leverage when parents questioned school policies, financial records, employment status, immigration documentation, medical histories, everything needed to destroy families who might cause problems. Carol discovered that Lawrence had deliberately misdiagnosed victims of severe bullying with behavioral and psychological disorders, creating official records that discredited their reports while protecting their tormentors through mentorship programs that were actually cover-ups. Frank found hundreds of Dorothy's falsified medical reports, each one hiding evidence of extreme physical violence. Students beaten unconscious were listed as having seizures. Children with concussions from assault were diagnosed with attention deficits. Victims of sexual assault were classified as having behavioral issues and removed from school. The spirits began manifesting directly that night, not as terrifying specters, but as they had been in life. Vulnerable teenagers who had trusted adults to protect them. They appeared in mirrors, in photographs, in the reflection of windows, all carrying the homework assignment that had defined their final days. Suicide notes. Sarah Mitchell, the first student to die under Ronald's watch, stepped from the bathroom mirror looking exactly as she had at 17. Long brown hair, honor student smile, wearing the Westfield Academy uniform she'd been buried in. "Mr. Patterson," she said with the polite tone students used when addressing authority figures, "I need to discuss my final project with you." She placed a noose on the RV's dinette table. "This took me 3 hours to tie correctly. I researched the knots online, practiced with different materials, calculated the drop distance based on my weight. I was always a good student, wasn't I? Always did my homework thoroughly." More students emerged from the shadows. 22 others who had died under the administration's watch. Each carried evidence of the systematic negligence that had driven them to suicide. Michael Chen, who had died at 16, played recordings of his meetings with Lawrence where he'd begged for help while being told his torment was character building. Tyler Williams, dead at 14, showed photographs of his injuries that Dorothy had classified as accidents, while the perpetrators continued their attacks with administrative protection. Emma Hartley, dead at 15, recited the sexual assault report that Ronald had filed in the garbage, calling her an unreliable witness with a history of fabricating stories. "We didn't just kill ourselves," Sarah explained with the patience of a teacher addressing slow students. "We were murdered by negligence, systematically, deliberately. You created an environment where suicide was preferable to continued existence. The night became a classroom where the dead taught the living about the consequences of their choices. using the same dismissive, cruel methods the administrators had once employed against desperate children. The trial began at midnight, conducted with the formal procedures of a school disciplinary hearing, but with the power dynamic reversed. The 23 dead students arranged themselves in a semicircle around plastic school chairs, where the 4 administrators were forced to sit, their knees cramped in furniture designed for children. Sarah Mitchell, now serving as both judge and prosecutor, held a thick file folder that she opened with ceremony. These proceedings will determine whether the defendants violated their duty of care to students under their supervision, resulting in 23 deaths by suicide between 1995 and 2010. She began reading case files in the flat, bureaucratic tone the administrators had once used to dismiss their victims' suffering. Case 1, Emma Hartley, age 15, reported sexual assault by 3 male students on October 12, 2003. Administrative response: victim blamed for putting herself in a compromising position. Perpetrators received verbal warning. Victim committed suicide November 2, 2003. Case 2, Michael Chen, age 16, reported systematic physical assault and cyberbullying for 2 years. Administrative response: victim labeled oversensitive and referred for psychological evaluation. Perpetrator's parents were major donors. No disciplinary action taken. Victim committed suicide January 15, 2007. The testimony continued through all 23 cases, each one revealing not just administrative negligence but active complicity in the bullying that drove children to suicide. But the most devastating evidence came from files the administrators thought had been destroyed. Internal communications revealing that they hadn't just failed to protect students, they had deliberately calculated which children were expendable. Ronald's private memos categorized students by their family's financial and social status. Children from wealthy families received immediate intervention for any problems, while children from poor families were systematically ignored or removed from school entirely. Phillips' correspondence with board members revealed a system where problem students, victims of bullying, were deliberately pushed toward breaking points to justify expulsions that would clean up the school's image. Lawrence's psychological evaluations showed he had intentionally misdiagnosed traumatized children to discredit their reports while providing glowing character references for their tormentors. Dorothy's medical records revealed she had been paid bonuses for keeping injury reports low, creating financial incentives to hide evidence of violence. The ultimate revelation came from Sarah herself. "You didn't just enable our suicides. You counted on them. You maintained secret statistics on high-risk students and deliberately pushed us toward breaking points because dead students couldn't file lawsuits or testify against you." She produced a document that made the administrators' wives gasp in horror. A confidential memo titled Crisis Management Protocol, Student Self-Harm Incidents, that outlined specific procedures for managing suicide liability while maintaining institutional reputation. "You turned our desperation into a business strategy," Sarah said. "Our deaths were not tragedies to be prevented. They were solutions to administrative problems." The dead students offered their final lesson. The administrators could choose to experience the same hopelessness their victims had felt, or they could spend their remaining years trying to prevent other children from reaching the same breaking point. The choice was theirs, but the students were excellent teachers and they'd already designed consequences for both options. Ronald broke when Sarah produced the final piece of evidence, a current file on his 12-year-old grandson Tyler, who was being systematically bullied at Jefferson Middle School where Ronald served on the advisory board. The file contained Ronald's own notes dismissing the boy's reports of harassment, perpetuating the same system that had killed 23 students decades earlier. "You're doing it again," Sarah said quietly. "Even now, even after everything, you're protecting the system that kills children rather than the children who need protection." Ronald pulled out his phone and began live streaming on Facebook, his voice shaking as he confessed to decades of criminal negligence. "My name is Ronald Patterson, former principal of Westfield Academy. Between 1995 and 2010, I systematically enabled the bullying and abuse that led to the suicide of 23 students under my care. I covered up assaults, ignored reports of sexual violence, and protected perpetrators when their families made large donations to the school." He provided internal documents, recorded meetings, and a complete list of co-conspirators spanning multiple school districts. He emptied his retirement accounts, $4.2 million, and established emergency hotlines and crisis intervention centers for bullied students. There are currently dozens of children in schools where I consult who are being pushed toward suicide through the same systematic negligence. I am providing their names and situations to Child Protective Services immediately. Philip followed, using his intimate knowledge of educational bureaucracy to expose similar networks of negligence in school districts across the country. He became the most effective whistleblower in American educational history, bringing down corrupt administrators who had created cultures of sanctioned cruelty. Lawrence dedicated his psychological expertise to developing revolutionary bullying detection and intervention protocols, working 18-hour days to train counselors in recognizing the signs he had once deliberately ignored. Dorothy used her medical connections to create mandatory reporting systems where suspicious injuries were automatically investigated, creating a national tracking system for school violence that couldn't be covered up. The wives faced impossible choices: abandon the men who had lied to them for decades or support their redemption as the only way to honor 23 dead children. Margaret made her decision while watching her grandson Tyler, knowing he could have become victim number 24 if the truth hadn't emerged. I'm not staying because I forgive you, Ron. I'm staying because those children deserve better than your guilt. They deserve to see you spend every remaining day protecting other children. The Spirit's verdict was swift and practical. Sarah spoke for all 23 victims. Your confession cannot restore our lives or heal our family's grief, but your honesty can protect current students who are walking the same path we walked. That's not forgiveness, that's mathematics. 23 deaths prevented through system change equals justice. Kevin Torres revealed his full purpose as the administrators were led away by federal agents investigating criminal negligence. Daniel visited me in dreams for years, telling me about the others who died. He guided me to this forest, to this place where other failed students found their peace. Tonight, they all rest easier. The Westfield Academy scandal became the largest educational prosecution in American history, leading to national reforms in bullying prevention and administrative accountability. All 4 administrators received prison sentences, but were allowed to serve their time developing anti-bullying curricula and training programs. They aged rapidly under the constant weight of their work, but found strange peace in knowing that each student life saved honored one of the children they had failed to protect. The spirits visited them regularly, not as tormentors, but as reminders of their ongoing responsibilities. Sarah appeared one final time as Ronald was being sentenced. She no longer looked like a victim, but like the strong young woman she might have become if adults had protected instead of betrayed her. "Thank you for finally hearing us," she said. "Now other children will have adults who actually protect them instead of feeding them to predators." The forest returned to its natural quiet, the trees no longer bearing the weight of rope burns and desperate final breaths. But in school board meetings across America, administrators began receiving anonymous packages containing student suicide notes and a simple message: "We're watching. We're counting. We remember every name." The real horror hadn't been supernatural at all. It had been the discovery that educational professionals could systematically facilitate the suicide of children through calculated negligence, and that American school systems had created bureaucratic structures that made such negligence not just possible, but profitable. The only redemption lay in complete transparency, total system reform, and the recognition that every child in every school deserved protection from adults who might see their suffering as acceptable collateral damage in maintaining institutional reputation. In schools across the country, new protocols were implemented, systems where student reports were taken seriously, where administrators faced criminal liability for negligence, where the protection of children took precedence over the protection of adult careers. The students had won. Education, it turned out, was most effective when those with power faced real consequences for betraying those in their care.